All right, so in this video, we're going to take a quick look at importing libraries in Python. Should be a super quick video. So throughout this fundamentals playlist, we've largely been, just working with kind of raw Python syntax. We haven't really been relying a lot on external libraries. At a few places, we have actually seen, maybe I've used things like the random library. So I would do a statement like import random. And that is actually not necessarily a third-party library. That's part of the Python standard library. So there's a set of libraries that come just with Python, right? So things like, I don't know, regular expression, which is RE, the JSON library, prettyprint or pprint, and the random library. And I'm actually going to have an entire playlist that's covering some of the utilities that I tend to use the most from the standard library. All right, so there's the standard libraries, and then there's also third-party libraries. So if you go back to the video, I think there was a playlist on working with Anaconda in Jupyter Lab where we created a virtual environment using Anaconda. And when we did that, we installed a lot of third-party libraries like Pandas or Polars or Matplotlib. So those are also libraries that we can import. And really the whole purpose of a library is to extend the functionality of Python. And that's one thing that's extremely powerful about the language. There's a huge community of developers that are out there contributing packages for a variety of tasks, all the way from, astronomy to very special use cases in other domains. But we have to be able to import them to use those capabilities, right? And there's a few different ways that you can do import, so I'm just going to kind of show you that here. Should be pretty straightforward. All right, so we'll import a few libraries. We're not going to use these libraries. Again, it's just going to show you a few of the different styles that you might see as far as importing packages. All right, and the way that we would typically import, so I'm just going to use that random package from the standard library as an example, is you would do an import statement, and then you can put the library's name. And it has to match, the defined spelling for that, right? So it might not be, beautiful soup. That library, I think the way that you import it is BS4. We can actually test that in a second. But what this is doing, this very simple statement, if I were to look right now before I run this, I'm going to put a cell right above. If I were to type random and then do a .tab, nothing happens. Right? It's saying, hey, I don't recognize this name random. All right. Restart and clear. But now once I do this import, that runs. And now if I were to say, what is random? Well, this is a module, all right, from, this is where it's essentially stored on my machine. All right, and you could also do like a random dot, and now we can see that we have access to all of the functions, classes, instances that are defined within that library, right? So if I wanted to, generate a random number from a normal distribution, we could use that random Gaussian function, right? So this is how these external libraries extend that functionality. So in this case, we've imported a library and we can access attributes of that library. All right. Now, another way that we will, sometimes see things done is, one thing that you're noticing here, to use this random.gauss, I have to tell Python, hey, I want to use this Gauss function from this random library. So I'm having to type the library's name in front to be able to access the methods, the classes, the instances that are defined by that library. All right. Sometimes to shorten the amount of, or to reduce the amount of typing that you have to do, we import libraries with an alias. All right. And this is very common. And if you're looking at code for particular libraries, if you're doing investigation, you will typically see that there is kind of a standard alias for certain packages. All right. So like, for example, pandas, this is how it is typically imported. All right, so what we say is we want to import pandas as PD. All right, so when I run that import statement, that runs, but notice if I do pandas, I don't, and I'm hitting dot and tab here, I don't have access like I did with random. And why is that? It's because when I imported it into Python here, I said do that as PD, so I gave it essentially an alias or a nickname. So I don't have pandas, I've got PD, and that gives me access to all of the built-ins for that library. All right. And if I type it, it does recognize that, hey, this is the module pandas from this particular location. All right, so this is just a regular import the library. We're not doing any change. So that's what we did when we imported random. And then we imported pandas here. We imported as PD. So we gave it an alias, and that's also very common for a lot of libraries. Most will have an alias, and again, it's more or less to kind of reduce the amount of keystrokes you have to use. All right, some libraries, when you import these, you're essentially loading them into memory on your machine, right? And again, a lot of times, especially if you're working on a machine that might have limited resources, saving every bit of memory that you can might be helpful. So you can actually just bring in certain modules of a function, and even certain just elements of a function or a package, I should say, or a library. All right, so we don't have to load the whole thing every time. We can just get what we want. And a lot of times this is done with libraries like SciPy. So if I were to import SciPy, right, there's a lot of things that come along with this. So it has a stats module. It has, a lot of other modules. I think a distance module. So what you can actually do is you can say, you know what, I don't want to import SciPy. I want to import just a specific module, like the SciPy stats module. And then you can, of course, alias. So I'm going to say, well, I'm going to import SciPy stats as ST. That will run. And now when I look at ST, this is the SciPy stats module. All right, so you don't have access to everything that's defined in SciPy. You only have access to the things that are defined in SciPy stats. And that might be exactly the behavior that you want, especially when you're working with libraries that have a lot of different components, might be very large. Right, so now if I do my ST, right, here's all of the things that are defined within that statistics module. All right, let's take another look at how we could just import maybe a very specific function. Right, so another example of a fairly large library is scikit-learn. All right, and a lot of times when people are using scikit-learn, it's massive. It has a tremendous amount of methods and classes, and maybe they only want one or two of them, right? So maybe they are, I don't know, doing something like k-means clustering, and I just want to bring in that k-means clustering method from scikit-learn, or that k-means object. All right, here's where we're going to run into a little bit of a difference, right? So at every point, or up to this point, every one of our import statements has to begin with import. All right, so we said import random, import pandas as PD, import SciPy stats as ST. So that's bringing in that module. If we want to bring in a specific, piece of a Python package, we can use the from statement. So we can say from. All right, so I'm saying, well, I want to import this from a particular library. So scikit-learn is the name of the library, and it has a module named cluster. So I want to say from scikit-learn's clustering module, import this k-means class. So it's implemented as a class. And now you don't have access to scikit-learn. Right, so if I do sklearn dot, scikit-learn's not defined. You don't have access to scikit-learn cluster. All right, so it says, hey, I don't know what you're talking about here, but you do have access to k-means from scikit-learn. So you're able to bring in just that piece that you need, right? So this is a very common method as well. All right, I am going to show you one method that I would strongly discourage you not to use pretty much ever. Right, so this is, I can't really think of a great use case where I would say, yeah, I recommend you doing this, but it is a method that you can use. You will run into things out there in the wild if you're looking at, people posting code online where they do this. So I'm going to show you this, right? And what this is importing everything from a library. So let's say that I went from, in the standard library, there is a module called pprint. All right, and what you can do before we do that, actually, let's just say, let's just look right now. If I were to do a p and then hit a dot, I can see I've got the pass keyword. I've imported pandas as PD. I've got the POW function, print, and those type of things. So that's what's defined in Python right out of the gate. And actually, let me clear the kernel so we can get an even better picture of this. So I'm not going to run any of this stuff before, but if I just type P and then hit dot, yeah, we've got pass, POW, print, and then we've got some magic methods that are part of the IPython and JupyterLab environment. All right, so as far as methods, I have pass, POW, and pprint. All right, well, what if we said this from pprint, which is in the standard library, we can say import star. That runs. All right, do I know what pprint is? Well, we haven't actually imported that module, but let's do p tab. Look at all of the things now. Instead of, just pass, POW, and print, we've got this thing called pprint. We've got this thing called pp, pformat. And what are these things, right? So notice that these are functions that were defined in that pprint library. So pformat, if I do pprint, right? So there we go. We've got that pprint right there. It's showing that it's coming from that pprint.py. All right, so what this actually does is, instead of like when I import PD, let's actually now do this with a bigger example. All right, let me cut that out. Let's say, what if we had said from pandas import star? So let's do that. That'll be a good, interesting case. So I'm just going to come down here to the bottom. So again, we start with P. We got pass, POW, print. Let's say from pandas import star. All right, now when I start with P, all right, we've got period range, pivot table, and all of these are functions that are coming from pandas. All right, and so it's basically just importing everything that's defined into that library right into your namespace. There's two big issues with that. So first off, let's just look. I don't know. Let's look at our sum. So right now, this sum is still the built-in sum. But what if pandas had implemented a method in the library that they called sum? All right. Well, if you would have done the import star, what it would have done is it would have overwritten the definition of the built-in sum. All right. So that can be very problematic, because when it's importing, when you do that import star, it's going to just say, okay, I'm getting all these names into my current namespace, and if they conflict, well, I'm bringing them in, and it's unclear which one's getting used. I think you would just overwrite with the one that comes from pandas. Another thing that is, it's not very good for is, personally, whenever I'm doing these type of imports, I like these module level imports, because if I need to use something from, say, SciPy stats, well, if I import it like this, I have to call it using st-dot. So when I go back and future me is looking at my code, right? If I'm calling this Anderson function, which I think it requires some arguments, let's just give it some x's, right? Whenever I see that function call, I know exactly where it's coming from, because I've got, essentially that prefix, which is required to tell it, hey, this is where I'm pulling that function from. All right, so you can always look at your definition and say, well, hey, I'm pulling it from here. Now, of course, when you have something like, the k-means, you're going to be using k-means raw in the code, and you don't have that prefix, but remember, you'll always be able to look at your import statements and figure out where things came from. So if I imported k-means from scikit-learn cluster, well, I can easily kind of reason about, okay, well, where's this k-means object? Where was it defined? If you do the import star, right, and we're using something like, pivot table, well, I never in my import see an import of pivot table. Is that a function that I defined somewhere else in the code? What exactly is that? So it can lead to some type of confusion. All right, so that's the various ways that you can import libraries, modules, or specific utilities within a library or module into Python. And I will be posting a playlist looking specifically at the standard library. Again, just, going through not a comprehensive view of the standard library because it's very big, but really just kind of looking at some of the libraries, and in particular, functions within those libraries that I find particularly useful. And then there will, of course, be other playlists that are covering some popular third-party libraries like Pandas, Polars, NumPy, Matplotlib, and so forth.